It helps when your kids are in marriage.
All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Those of you who are here in the room, as well as those who are tuning in on the live stream. My name is Vivek Bald, and I'm an associate professor in Comparative Media Studies and the director of graduate studies for CMS. Today we'll be providing you with information about the CMS Master's Degree Program. I'll start with a brief overview of the program, and then you'll hear from faculty members, lab managers, current second-year master's student, and Shannon Larkin, who is our graduate administrator. And with any luck, we'll also have different members of the faculty and research groups kind of moving in and out over time over the course of the 2 hours as their schedules permit. And we have the live chat going as well.
We do.
Is there information about that?
This is on the Comparative Media Studies and Writing YouTube channel. You can find the link on our website or just search for it on YouTube.
Okay, great. So the master's program in Comparative Media Studies was founded in 1999 with our first cohort graduating in 2001. This means that we are nearing 20 years of graduates, at which point there will be around 150 of our former students working in academia, tech, journalism, gaming, film and entertainment, and the nonprofit sector. So what kind of program is Comparative Media Studies? Broadly speaking, our program addresses the challenges brought about by fundamental shifts in practices of media production, distribution, and consumption at a local, national, and global scale. We see this work as particularly urgent at a time of ever accelerating technological and social change. Rather than focus on media-specific silos, games, film, social media, computational media, etc., we explore the dynamics of media and societal change through a comparative, historical, and multidisciplinary lens. So this means, in essence, well, that the reason for the word comparative in the title of our program is that since the founding of CMS, our faculty, labs, and curriculum have all emphasized critical analyses of the role of media in society that are comparative across different media forms, spaces, communities, and practices, across different historical periods, across different local and global cultural and subcultural contexts, utilizing methodologies that are drawn from the humanities, social sciences, and computational sciences, while also drawing upon the insights of different forms of media production and practice. Our faculty, labs, and researchers reflect that diversity in the approach to critical analyses of media. Among our faculty and researchers, you'll find individuals who are primarily media practitioners, others who are primarily media scholars and theorists, and others who combine media scholarship and practice in their work. This is a particularly productive, even heady mix. The conversations and collaborations that it fosters are what makes MIT's Comparative Media Studies program a uniquely generative space for scholarship, research, and graduate study. The research groups themselves are part of what makes the CMS program unique. We currently have 9 research groups, is that correct? Under the umbrella of Comparative Media Studies, each one of which is engaged at the intersection of critical media research and practice. Some of these are labs led by our faculty members with funding from various granting agencies. Others are led by research scientists, of whom we have a couple representatives to talk about their work today as well. And the majority of master students are funded for their 2 years at CMS, either through work that they do in one of these research groups or through research assistantships with specific faculty members outside of the research groups. Each year, the program is further enriched by visiting scholars and practitioners. Visitors are often associated with specific research groups, and often they will also teach a course as part of their time here. So this is also a great opportunity to learn from the talented people who are passing through each year. Our two-year curriculum is a mix of required foundations courses and electives that students can choose from within CMS's broader offerings. The electives from within CMS's offerings, or in some cases from other schools and departments at MIT, or even in some cases from Harvard University through MIT's consortium relationship with Harvard. There are many additional details about each course online, so I encourage you to explore those on our website. In the first year, theory and methods and major media texts, which you see here in the first semester, help provide a shared language and a shared grounding given the diversity of students in the program, some of whom are coming from primarily scholarly backgrounds who are recently out of undergraduate work, and some of whom are coming from various fields within media industries, or are engaged as media practitioners for a number of years before entering the program. So these foundational courses kind of bring everyone onto roughly the same page in terms of a shared language to talk about media and the analysis of media, as well as a series of shared foundational texts for students to kind of build upon. You'll see that there is also a hands-on component to the first year curriculum. In the first year, this course comes through a workshop class, Workshop 1, in which students are exposed to and engage in various forms of media production and research practice associated with different CMS faculty and labs. Then in the second semester, and this is a fairly new change to our curriculum, students then choose from a small selection of workshop-based courses that focus on specific forms of media production, such as game production, documentary film, etc. Another key part of the student experience at CMS is our weekly colloquium. Each week, CMS hosts speakers to present recent and ongoing research in a variety of fields of media analysis and production. In some cases, our own faculty, researchers, and alumni present their work in the colloquium. And in others, we draw on the many media scholars and practitioners who are moving through the Boston-Cambridge area, or in some cases who we bring in from across the country and across the world. The second year in the curriculum offers students the opportunity to take more electives focused on their specific areas of interest while working on their master's thesis. The thesis occupies an increasing amount of time and focus for students in the second year, with the second semester of the second year devoted largely to its writing under the guidance of a thesis advisor and an additional reader. These thesis advisors, are usually drawn from our core faculty, and in some cases, students choose two faculty as co-advisors to draw upon their different strengths of different faculty. So some students have also included elements of media production as part of their thesis projects, in addition to their written theses. Our students have done truly impressive work in their thesis projects on a really wide range of topics, so I encourage you again to take the time to look at the list of recent theses on the CMS website. In addition, these theses have formed the foundation of a wide range of books that CMS faculty, particularly those alumni who have gone into the academic field, have gone on to publish after their time here in the program. These are just a few of the examples. Ashwin Punatham Baker's from Bombay to Bollywood, Candace Callison's How Climate Change Comes to Matter, Anita Say-Chan's Networking Peripheries, Kevin Driscoll's Minitel, Ryan Jacobson's Studios Before the System, and Whitney Tretton's Gap Stutter. So I also encourage you to spend some time looking at the full list of alumni at the link listed here. They are a talented bunch who have used their study, research, writing, and production in the CMS program as a launching pad for work in an array of different fields. So that's my brief introduction. There's plenty of time. There are going to be plenty of time for questions to elaborate on any one of these aspects of the program. But now I'd like to hand things off to some of our faculty, researchers, and students who will introduce themselves, and each of them will talk to you about what they are, the work that they do here, and their own experiences and perspectives on the CMS graduate program. So I think, Heather, we'll start with you, and then Michael.
Great, thanks, Vivek. So I'm Heather Hendershot. I'm a professor of film and media, is my official title within the CMS program. I've been here since 2012, and most of my research is on right-wing media, both historical and contemporary. And basically I'm a media historian, very archivally based in a digital moment or era or apocalypse, whatever digital moment we're in. I'm in the archive looking through papers and files and dusty things and sneezing and looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack for exciting historical moments to write about. I started my career writing about children's television, did 2 books in that area before I got shifted gears. There were some connections between children's television and right-wing media that might not be immediately obvious, but I was working on censorship and issues of cultural politics, and actually the transition was pretty smooth. My 2 most recent books are, one is called What's Fair on the Air? Cold War Right-Wing Broadcasting and the Public Interest. So it is about the right-wing broadcasting boom of the 60s and 70s and how the FCC shut that down, and it's a kind of interesting kind of prehistory of Fox News in a certain way. How right-wing news, what right-wing news looked like before the deregulation of the Reagan years enabled Rush Limbaugh and later Fox and so on to come along. My most recent book is called Open to Debate, How William F. Buckley Put Liberal America on the Firing Line. So it is about a television show that ran from 1966 to 1999, hosted by William F. Buckley, one of the fathers of the American contemporary conservative movement. And it was a show in which people from the left and the right they argued a little bit, but mainly they didn't scream at each other. They had debates. They had real conversation. And so it was obviously a book in which I was making a kind of plea for civility and looking at the kind of a model for how that might happen, which might seem very naive, but we must hold out hope that we could talk to each other like sane and rational people. And this show really showed how that could be done for 33 years. So that was the focus of that book. And right now I'm researching a book on the Chicago Democratic National Convention of 1968, the media coverage of that convention, the fallout from that, and that was a peak moment where people, conservatives, accused the media of bias, and they didn't call it fake news, but they said words that kind of added up to that in certain ways. So it's a pivot moment for thinking about accusations of media being, or the news specifically, being unfair, being biased and slanted and so on. And I actually recently wrote a piece for Politico exactly on this. So if you want to get a sense of what do I write, what does it look like, what's the style, etc., you can find my recent piece on Politico on the DNC of 68. Here at CMS, I teach the Theories and Methods 2 class. Vivek put up that nice chart to show you your 2 years of study here. And so Theories and Methods 2 is the follow-up to Theories and Methods 1, which you would take in the fall here. And then in the spring, you would take my class, and it would culminate with the production of your thesis proposal, your master's thesis proposal. And it's a course that teaches about methods, but also helps you to think about style and narrative and structure and how to conceptualize yourself as a writer and a researcher, and helping you to think through not just what do you want to write, but why do you want to write it, why is it important, and how do you want to write it, how do you want to tell the story, who's your audience, and how can you craft your prose to appeal to and engage that audience. So that's what we do in that class. I'll give you a heads up that I'm going to be on leave next year, so I won't be teaching that class, but I will be available for contact if you want to reach out to talk to me about your interests and so on. I also, like all of our faculty, am available for advising theses. In the past, Vivek actually showed one I advised recently, two. One was about the politics of contemporary comedy. It was called Everything is Awful. It's about snark. You might have noticed that one at the bottom. And then there was another one on Trump's use of social media that I was the lead advisor on. I've, in the past, advised theses on ranging from like podcasts and the television industry and how it affects writers and the writer unions and so on, to working with a student working on educational technology use in New York City public schools. So I can work with you on a thesis in a lot of different areas. That said, I'd be delighted to work with any budding archival media historians, because that's my sort of home base and my expertise, and I would love to share that with you. I will add, I don't think Vivek mentioned that the theses are, and Shannon, you can confirm this, they're posted online, right? And how would they find them from the website?
They can find almost all of them through the CMSW website, or they can look at the library archive called dspace.mit.edu.
Okay, good. So if you want to take a look at, I don't know if I should say hundreds of theses, many theses are posted online, and just see the range of work that's been done in the past. And also it helps you with sort of questions about style, or how long are these things, or things that we can answer your questions about. But it's nice to actually look at the theses themselves and get a sense of what your crowning project would be at the end of your 2 years. And we kind of open by saying you're going to be writing a thesis, I think because it's such a fast-paced program. And when people ask me, what are you looking for in applicants? I often say, well, we don't want someone who knows exactly what their thesis is to such an extent that they could just write it tomorrow. They don't even need our program because they've got it all sorted out. It's good to come in with intellectual curiosity and flexibility. But that said, having, knowing the area you want to work in, knowing some of the specifics, having a good idea of what your research focus will be, if not every detail of your thesis, is it's going to make your application stronger, because the program is so quick that if you come in totally rudderless, it's going to be hard for us to help you get that rudder going the right way. So we're here to help you with the rudder. This metaphor is going to just sink like a ship in a moment. But it helps to have some sense of what you're up to before you get here, so you can hit the ground running, I guess is what I'm saying. I think that's all I have to say. Gives you a little idea of what I do. And I actually was the director of graduate studies until just a few months ago. And so I'm a good resource for you to get in touch with if you have any sort of nitty-gritty questions about how the program functions, as well as Vivek and, of course, Shannon, who knows everything, like a supercomputer.
Okay, so I'm Michael Jacobson. I'm the research coordinator for the MIT Game Lab, one of the research labs under CMS. I'll try to do this from a potential grad student perspective. So I teach a number of classes. One of them is Introduction to Game Studies. All the 6 or 7 classes that the Game Lab teaches has more students wanting to take them than we can take. So for that one, if there's a graduate student in the program who is interested in game studies, they can serve as my TA for that class. I also teach a class for graduate students called Playful and Social Interaction Design. So my background is in informatics and then interaction design, and then I ended up here. It's a studio-based class where students come with an idea of a project they want to do, and we spend the semester helping each other realizing that project, and we do a lot of readings and discussions around doing research through design, what that means, what kind of results you could expect, and so on. We run a number of research projects in the lab. Last summer, we went to Colombia and taught a summer class for computer science students who are doing VR. But our perspective on the class was how to integrate their lived experiences in making games that are related to Colombia in some sense, because there's a lot of games out there, both video games and board games, that take place in Colombia and presumably are about Colombia, but they're not really about Colombians ever. So that grew out of a book project I'm working on colonialist-themed board games. And we brought a graduate student on our trip to work with us as basically a research assistant and teaching assistant for that. We also went to Puerto Rico and did a workshop there with professional game designers, but very much with the same kind of purpose of coming up with concepts and mechanics for more interesting games about Puerto Rico than what's currently out there. As of today, we have also started a project where we will be working with Native American tribes in northern Maine. So there are 3 tribes there that are interested in collaborating with us again with similar purpose, using game design workshops as a way for not just presenting aspects of their lives that would be of interest and importance for the rest of us to know more about, but also to help build self-image and help convey a more real concept of the life that these people are living. Other projects involve, we're working together with a Swedish game developer called King. They are mostly known for making a game called Candy Crush. And we're making a digital tool, web-based tool, which is meant to increase reflection and awareness around inclusivity in the creation of video game characters. So it's basically a tool that you can input a concept for a character you're creating, and it gives you an interactive visualization of different aspects of inclusivity in that character, and you can modify it and adjust it and have communications or discussions about what if we tried something that is less well represented within our studio or within the genre or in game design in general. So part of that has been running workshops both in Sweden and here, both for game developers and for students, and we used graduate students from our program and from Harvard who came with us and helped us facilitate these workshops and participate in writing papers about the outcomes and things like that. So I think that's a fairly good representation of what the grad student involvement is in our activities. Also, in the mission statement of excuse me, of the Game Lab, we say that we teach game design, we study games, we make games, we are a functioning game development studio. Usually when we work with other game companies, we don't make games because they already know how to do that, but often we have other companies who are interested in having a game made that's related to their activities, but that's not their expertise, so then they come to us and then we are the developers. But on top of all of that, we also think that it's really important to play games. If you stop playing games, we think that you drift away from understanding games. on a very basic fundamental level. So we try to play games every week, and it's open for the graduate students to join us. And it's not always fun games. I mentioned the colonialist theme board games project. There's a lot of racism and slavery and horrendous stuff going on in those games. But it's still, I think, interesting to seeing all these different mechanics and types of games play out and be able to do a critical analysis from a first-hand experience. I think that's enough.
Sure, I'm Scott Oswald. I'm the creative director of both the Education Arcade and the Game Lab. Have a background originally in theater and television and games for the last 25 years. The Education Arcade and the Game Lab overlap significantly because we both do work on games. Education Arcade was founded in 2000 basically to look at issues around games and learning. It is itself situated inside the teacher education program at MIT, which is a program largely for undergraduates, although graduate students can sometimes participate, but that prepares students to be teachers. And so we have this sort of double focus of teaching, preparing people to be teachers and thinking about schools as systems with sort of more, I would say, open-ended looking into educational technology and its uses. The stuff we do around game design, I always feel it's important to say that the problem with the term educational game is that it often conjures up an image of school, and I think generally what we're trying to do is find alternate models of learning that are not like what we think of as school. And so the games that we do don't try to replicate school and just dress them up with bright colors and funny sounds, but rather really get, we hold with the thesis of Ralph Koster that what makes any game interesting is learning the game. And so if we're doing a game for learning, we're trying to make sure that it's the game, that's learning the game that is the interesting thing, and that we just try to make that coterminous with learning something academic at the same time. Mika has already sort of described well how graduate students are largely involved in the design work that we do, and as he said, it's design research. We actually make product that sometimes gets out there, that actually is going to be out in the world, but we're always, sometimes not, sometimes it's an experiment, but in either case, we're always, as we make it, we're trying to learn from it and try to have some impact on the larger field. We just published, if you're interested in this space and you want to understand the kind of work we do, we just published a book, MIT Press rather just published a book of our work called Resonant Games. And that gives you a pretty good overview of what we do. Also, I think like most research managers here will tell you, I enjoy also advising on theses when I can, and generally I find that however interesting my work is, it's more interesting if I'm working with students, graduate students in particular. That's what we're here for. We're not here just to do the work, we're here to sort of work with you all. So.
Sarah, what do you
Sure.
talk a bit about ODL? And then,
Yeah. I'm Sarah Wallison, and I'm from the MIT Open Documentary Lab. We study and incubate new forms of storytelling using emerging technologies, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence. And when I say storytelling, I already have to correct myself because many people argue that in virtual reality, you're not telling stories. People are story finding, you're creating story experiences when you're creating dialogue in interactive platforms, so it's not just about telling. But what it is doing is really essentially changing the role of the author, the subject, and the audience, because it's much more collaborative, it's interactive, so it's a different kind of documentary. And we build the field, we have resources, we have a DocuBase, which is a database of the trends and the people projects and tools changing the landscape. We have a project called Moments of Innovation, which traces the whole history of documentary and innovation. We have a publication, Immerse, on Medium, which we did together with Tribeca Film Institute. And that just is a platform and a place for dialogue around these new emerging media types. And now, most recently, we have a co-creation studio that we launched about a year and a half ago. And we just had a big symposium about co-creation methodologies. And we're in the process of writing a big field study about co-creation methodologies. So those are some of the projects we do. Grad students, they work right along us. And it depends really what our lab's doing. So we do a lot of different projects, and every year there can be a different project. I can tell you right now, we're really focused on this field study, and so the grad students are doing research on that. In particular right now, visual imagery that we need for the study. When we had the symposium, they'll help with that. 2 years ago, we had one on virtual reality, and it was very much based on a grad student's expertise that he had developed writing his thesis. So he really had a heavy hand in curating the whole symposium. Grad students also go to Sundance every year. This is always a little perk that students like, as press, which means they get a much better pass than I do. They can get into everything, and they write about this section called The New Frontier, which is the section of Sundance which looks at technology and art, and fiction and nonfiction storytelling. They also always work on DocuBase. That's a really important resource for the field. There's really nothing like it. If you want to even know what this field is, go there. And actually, we have a student right here, a potential student who worked on it all summer on the taxonomy, so very excited to see you. Yeah, and so those are some of the things they do. We also run a lot of workshops, and yeah, a lot of lectures. Oh yeah, and thank you. We have a big fellows program, which is very exciting. We have people coming from all over the world and locally who are experimenting with documentary, whether it's from a maker point of view or from a scholar point of view, studying it. And it creates a really vibrant community for the students too. Some students have even ended up collaborating with our fellows. They're very experienced, mid-career professionals. And we meet weekly and we have lectures. We have a guest lecture every week from somewhere in a variety, somewhere in the world from a variety of fields, whether it's web VR or an interactive street music platform. So yeah, lots of different things going on in the lab too. And did I forget anything else? I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Rika,
Yes.
you speak to your experience, I guess, applying to the program, what drew you to the program, what your experience has been.
So I was sitting where you were 2 years ago, I think. Yeah, it was 2 years ago. And I took a lot of time to think whether to apply or not, to see if it was the right fit for me. I already had, coming into this, several years out of college, professional career. I'm professionally a DJ, curator, I produce events. Also had some experience adjuncting, teaching in university, so I saw this program and I talked to a lot of people, some professors here, as well as some alumni to see if it was a good fit for me. And ultimately, it's a great fit. And what's great about the program here is it's what was conveyed in the opening statement is that it's really what you make of it, and there's a lot of directions you can go in. And there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of collaboration here. I think for me, the best perks are you can take almost any class at Harvard, which is great as a great option, especially MIT is STEM driven, so there are sometimes other classes there that are great. The classes here are also pretty awesome, and it's very structured the first semester, a little less structured the second semester, and then by the second year you're in full swing with your thesis work, and then you can take courses as you need to get to your thesis goal. And the thing is, if you do come in here, you will walk out with a thesis, which is going to be useful in whatever direction you go into. My thesis that I'm working on now is about women DJs, a feminist approach to DJing as a cultural practice. So my field work will be mostly in New York, and I'm also going to do the option of creating a companion media piece with it. I'll be making a podcast with it as well. In terms of the lab, I'm working directly as a RA for Professor Reich, who is affiliated with ODL. So it's also being part of the ODL community, Open Doc Lab community, but specifically working with Vivek. I'm working on a platform that he's creating as a addition to a documentary and book project. I almost forgot what it's called, Lost Histories, which is an interactive platform for people to contribute content and stories. This is connected to his book Bengali Harlem. I'm also helping doing research for him for grants, project managing that, as well as like working with some of the more tech people developing the platform. So it's pretty good, solid experience, and and it's really interesting as well. The weekly colloquiums are pretty cool too. There's food every week at the end of the colloquium. There's a lot of food on this campus all the time.
Tell them about
Food Cam. Yes, there's this thing called Food Cam, and there's also an email list. By the time you get the email, food's over. But there's this area.
There's a live stream though.
Yeah,
You just have the tab open. You can just check in.
Always check.
Or
Heather
lab
has like
isn't that far
plastic
away.
contains in her office. She's
I
always
keep
ready.
Tupperware just in
She
case.
keeps Tupperware.
You never know, sushi, guacamole, whatever.
Yeah, sometimes during member week it gets pretty good.
Any of the faculty and staff take full advantage.
Yeah.
Tell them what food can is.
So Food Cam is basically there's an area in the building where a lot of our classes are. It's connected to the Media Lab complex. There's an area where people leave extra food out, and there's a camera pointed to it, and it gets a button is pressed, and that picture is sent out to this email list.
And it's like a zombie apocalypse, just.
Yeah, and you'll just be sitting around, all of a sudden you see people running by you, and they're like, oh, Food Cam. Or a lot of us.
I once put out 80 bag lunches, and they were gone in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Warm.
Yeah, that's the only reason you should apply.
You get fed here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why I decided to come, especially as someone who's already had a career and wanting to sort of expand my knowledge or be more critical about what I had done, what I was working on, was because it's interdisciplinary. And even though there's some foundational courses, which I think are really great to get you started, it's really what you make of it. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the community, in the area here that's one of the challenges, is like there's so much going on in the talks, and every lab, most labs have weekly meetings, which are also, some of them are open to the public. University, MIT does talks. There's a lot of intellectual and culturally rich activities here. But if there's anything specific that you want to ask me, not in front of everyone, on the side, I'm happy to answer it. Anything else I should mention?
No, I was just going to say that Justin is also here.
Oh, yeah.
Justin.
I'm gonna.
Should I vacate? I'll vacate.
You want mine?
Oh, no, actually,
So I
supposed to
stay.
see
I
Jay.
stay.
So
I
you
stay.
can probably
Okay,
answer.
right.
I just walked by the cookies. That was extremely tempting.
After all that food
I know.
talk.
I know, right? I'm Justin Reich. I'm a new assistant professor here. I run a lab called the Teaching Systems Lab, along with Eric Klopfer. Eric Klopfer has been here for 20 years, but recently moved into Comparative Media Studies. And we're both really interested in learning media, how media are used to help develop people's capacity in all kinds of different ways, to divide fractions, to teach kids, to be more effective civic actors, all kinds of things. So my background is I was a former classroom teacher, and then got a doctorate down the river at Harvard looking at large-scale online learning systems. When HarvardX got started, I helped them start up their research lab and build the research infrastructure there. So I've been interested in teaching and large-scale learning for a long time, and now my interests are really in combining those. So a lot of what we do in our lab is investigate how it is that we can we imagine that all around the world people want to see more ambitious teaching and learning happening in K-12 classrooms. They want to see less passive learning, fewer recitations, more active, engaged, student-centered learning. And we think the only way that'll happen is if we can dramatically increase the quantity and quality of learning experiences that are available to teachers throughout their lifetime. And because teachers are incredibly busy people, including one of the things we ask them to do is to keep track of all the children. So if you put all the teachers in one part of the building, then the kids are roaming free in the other part of the building. That online and blended learning will be an essential part of building that capacity. So my lab is a super interdisciplinary place. We have teacher educators and learning scientists and game designers and people who do work in evaluation and measurement. We do a lot of design research where we build things, we put it into the field in various kinds of ways. We've had a bunch of partnerships the last year with most of the major national computer science professional development organizations like Code.org and Exploring Computer Science and Mobile Computing Principles. We have a new project this year that we're working with teacher educators from around the country. So we have a program called the Inspire Fellowship, Innovative New Spaces for Practice and Rehearsal in Teacher Education. Coming up with acronyms is like 90% of what we do. And then the other 10% is putting things in the field. But we have 13 teacher educators from UT Austin and William & Mary and UMass Dartmouth and Oakland University and really big schools and really small schools and places where teacher educators' jobs is to do a lot of research and a little bit of teaching and places where their job is to do a lot of teaching. We have folks come into our lab and look at some of the tools that we're using for creating online and blended learning experiences for teachers to take them back to their different and diverse contexts, to do research with us and to figure out how we can develop and refine some of those ideas. So that's sort of a sampling of some of the kinds of things that we do, but all of it's built around the idea of thinking about how do we take new forms of learning media, how do we build things, put them in the world that develop the capacity of teachers both in the U.S. and around the world.
I'll speak a bit about myself as a faculty member as well. I've been here for about 10 years now. My background, like Reika, I went to graduate school after having been involved in various forms of media and cultural production. I worked for about a dozen years as a documentary filmmaker before getting a degree that was essentially a kind of interdisciplinary cultural studies degree, and then was hired here right after that. My work as a filmmaker and as a scholar now is really focused on the histories and experiences of South Asian immigrants and migrants to the U.S. and to Britain, and kind of the navigation of the two sort of imperial powers of the United States and Britain, and both during the colonial period and the post-colonial period. So my first documentary film focused on South Asian immigrant taxi drivers in New York City in the early 1990s, at a point in time where South Asian immigrants had become the largest group within the taxi driving industry. My second documentary focused on South Asian youth and music and anti-racist politics in Britain in the 1990s. It focused on a generation of South Asian youth whose parents were brought to Britain or encouraged to come to Britain, basically to rebuild Britain after the Second World War, and grew up as working class Britons of color at a time when also they were surrounded by beginnings of hip hop and punk rock and Jamaican music, etc. So that documentary film focused on a generation of musicians that combined all of those forms of music, both with South Asian music and with anti-racist activism. My current project that I've been working on here for the last several years consists of a book, a documentary, and a web platform that Rika mentioned, that are all focused in different ways on recovering the history of one of the earliest communities of Muslim immigrants to the United States, who were undocumented immigrants from predominantly from what's now Bangladesh, who settled in in U.S. cities at the time of the Asian exclusion laws, and integrated into African American and Puerto Rican communities, and created these interracial families that whose kind of second generation are now in their 60s and 70s. So that project, as I mentioned, that was the basis for a book that I published in 2013 called Bengali Harlem and the Lost Histories of South Asian America. And I'm currently working on a documentary film project that follows the son of one of the early Bengali migrants to settle in Harlem, as he tries to uncover his father's and then his mother's stories. And then this web platform, which is we're designing as a kind of a space of collective community storytelling centered around family photographs, where photographs are being used not as a kind of an end point, but as a beginning point for telling stories, memories, etc., and kind of collectively, collectively asserting that that these family photographs are in fact historical documents, and that the people in these photographs are historical actors. It's, in a sense, a kind of digital people's history project. I also am a faculty member of the Open Documentary Lab, and have been very enriched in my kind of participation in the weekly programming at ODL. And I teach within the program. I teach courses in documentary film production. There's one that's kind of a basic production class that's focused on short web-based documentaries called Short Attention Span Documentary. And another class that I teach on a regular basis is called Social Justice and Documentary Film. And that is kind of a combination of critical analysis of recent social justice documentaries, as well as a group project in which 3 or 4 students together, groups of 3 or 4 work over the course of the semester with a fairly decent now kit of equipment to produce a short social justice focused documentary. I also teach a course on South Asians, history and media representations of South Asians in the United States, and more recently have been developing a course that's really centered on Black British cultural studies, which while my work has been in South Asian diaspora studies, has been kind of the grounding for my own kind of theoretical approach toward media and culture. So.
Okay.
Should we open it up to questions? Go ahead and do that. Questions and cookies, yes.
Can you talk about the working relationship with the Microsoft social media contest? I heard that a lot of students work on their thesis with Microsoft, which is pretty close by. Is that correct?
It depends.
It's the Microsoft Research
It's like Nancy Bayman.
Center, yeah, with Nancy Bayman, and yeah, I mean, it's not that we see each other every day, but there is a relationship, and several of our students have worked with researchers over there.
And they come and present at our colloquium. Some of our faculty present there, so there's a kind of nice back and forth.
With the Ed Arcade, do you look to develop material and games and technology that is going to then be deployed within schools, or do you do that and think about media and technology that can be deployed without schools?
It's the latter. I mean, I think we occasionally, and a lot of it's driven by the funding, so occasionally we're doing a project that is specifically designed for schools. I would say where possible, even when we're doing something for schools, we're thinking about how can this sort of change the definition of what schooling is. So we frequently do games. where maybe they're largely played outside of school and there's some sort of touch point that brings it into the classroom. So we're trying to be as broad as possible in our definition of what learning is.
General question about the impact of research groups and coursework and the program. Is placement in the research group a fundamental part of the program? Do all students conduct the research group? And then, in terms of developing a thesis, is what you're doing related to what you're studying in the research group, or if you want to, yes, if you don't want to, no, be able to.
It's a bit of a mix. Oh yeah, so the question is, has to do with the relationship between the research groups and the curriculum and the experience of taking courses, writing a thesis, etc. All of the students are either placed with a research group or with an individual faculty member. Because there are some faculty members who are doing work that is not within the structure of one of the research groups. And as part of the admissions process, the admissions committee and others try to do their best to match up students with particular interests to place them in research groups where their interests will kind of have a fertile ground, really. And in some cases, the research groups are specifically, looking for, have spots for incoming graduate students. So we try to, again, find a good match, right? So in terms of how your work within a research group does not necessarily have to be directly connected to your thesis. That connection, I think, probably varies from one student to another. But I'll let you
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it happens that the work that we need to have done in the research group will end up having very little to do with your thesis. I mean, as much as we try to make, it is a worthwhile experience to be an RA in a research group, but sometimes there's work that has to get done that maybe of no interest to you. I mean, that's the blunt way of saying it.
That can happen, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's part of a financial ecosystem that's
Right.
kind of complicated, but the bottom line is it's your job while you're here that gives you your monthly stipend, covers your tuition and your health insurance. So, and the last stage of our committee meeting to decide who's going to be admitted is, we get it down from 100 applicants, our typical pool, to 50, to 40, to 20, and then once we're at 20, they're all great, and we have 8 to 10 slots, and we're like, okay, who can match where? Who's the best match for the research lab to make sure that they're funded and so on, because we don't want to bring in anyone unfunded. We want everyone to be on equal footing and have the same financial situation hitting the ground here.
Yeah, the only thing I can add to that is definitely in our lab, we have some people who their research thesis is directly related and some not, and sometimes when it is, it can even count as their research hours. So, you have this commitment of 20 hours a week because it's funded, and if it's also your thesis, that's good.
But I've also seen the opposite, someone who wanted to be in the education arcade, and by the time they were into their thesis, their interests had shifted, and that's fine too. It's not, we're not committing you to any thesis topic by putting you in a research group.
I also think, from the student side, maybe you don't want to be doing your thesis 20 hours a week in a lab and then as much time as you need to outside. So really, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I like that, what I'm doing. I find I feel fortunate that the work I'm doing with Vic is of interest to me, but is different, and I'm actually building or actually refreshing some previous skills I had, which I think will help me when I graduate, which is web project management, which I did like 20 years ago. So I think that's very useful, practical.
So do you stay in the same lab both years, or if your interests change, can you switch labs?
Want me to take that one?
Most people stay in the same lab the whole time, and we actually discourage a shift of labs. Sometimes it happens for reasons that have to do with the lab itself or the student or whatever, but that's something we really try to minimize. We like the continuity of once you're here, that is your lab for your 2 years.
We do encourage people though, if you are assigned a lab and you find that there's another lab that you're really interested in, all of the labs are open to you as an attendee. We have a student that is placed in Justin's lab who discovered when she got here that she was really interested in the open documentary lab. And so she does her work in the teaching systems lab and attends the ODL meetings. And so we really encourage our students to cross-pollinate as much as they want to.
You had a question?
My question is about, as instructors, how we would explain classroom dynamics, because what I find interesting is the variety of fields in which people come from. Some students write books and do PhDs, while others go straight into industries. So I wonder, especially when there's such a wide variety of angle in which we look at media, going from short span documentary to representational mode of documentary itself. I wonder, as instructors, how it's the collaborative aspect amongst the students in discussions. How much do students direct conversation versus how much does the program try to facilitate a common language?
That's a good question, and it varies. I think the approach varies from course to course. So that, for example, in workshop 1, it's a hands-on kind of orientation, and people working together in groups, whether they are designing a board game or designing an app or whatever they might be doing. There's this collaborative process, whereas ultimately the thesis is something you do on your own. It's an individual research project that is sort of conventional in that way. It might be sort of different than the kind of work you do after graduation if you go into industry. And so in some classes you'll be writing your own research paper that you did on your own, and you might share it with your cohort and for feedback and so on, but it's a more conventional individually designed project. So that kind of just gets the tip of the iceberg, I think, of your question, but maybe it's a good starting point if others have anything to add.
I mean, I think that combination from my standpoint in the courses that I've taught, that combination has been a really fruitful one, really generative. And I taught one of the workshop classes when there was a second semester, workshop 2, and we worked on a project collectively that was about kind of charting the first 100 days of Trump's presidency. And there were people who brought skills to that who were documentary skills, right? And others who really wanted to learn those documentary skills, who then worked together as smaller units within the class. There was someone with game building skills who built a kind of a game that was part of this larger project. And so each person was able both to kind of contribute to that class based on their skills, but also to extend those skills through sort of working collaboratively with others. That's the ideal. And I mean, I think, Rika, I don't know whether you want to talk about that from a student perspective, what it's been like.
Yeah, my cohort is, there's 8 of us, and we have varying backgrounds. Some people have, worked already 10 plus years. Some people have closer to being graduates from undergrad. And everybody brings something different to the table, and it's really, it works. I mean, I think it's been very helpful. And in terms of the workshop 1 class is very collaborative. You work in groups. The other courses that I have taken so far, not so much, but there's a collegiate atmosphere that if people need help or we ask each other, for help or whatever that we need to. So it's there. It's pretty small cohort. So the first year you're in every class together. So you are working together closely, even if you're not collaborating on each assignment, which you're not, only in the workshop 1. And then depending on what courses you take in your electives, like I know the second semester you have to do a workshop type class on your own, a hands-on class. And depending on what kind of class you take, I know some people took courses where they were put again in groups and stuff, and in other classes it just depended, it varied.
Yeah, and that's the class, I guess your second semester, you've got, Shannon, there's workshop 2, but there's also an elective, right?
There's no workshop
Yep.
2 anymore.
Well, there's the new version.
The hands-on class,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is sort of workshop 2-ish.
Right.
And an elective.
Yeah.
And
So that's-
media theories and methods too.
Right, so that's where you might end up working outside of your cohort, your home base of your fellow students. And what we're referring to confusingly as Workshop 2 is that it used to be a class called Workshop 2, and then what we did was switch it to make it more flexible so that students would have more options and not do every single thing with their cohort if they didn't want to. And so we gave them a list of managed electives of hands-on production-oriented type courses to choose from, with the understanding that if you find something else, like some once-only class at Harvard, for example, that is out there, you come and ask us if it's okay, and 9 times out of 10 we say yes. This
I
seems
did
perfectly
that.
fine.
I took electronic music, which is production-based course, so it counted. There wasn't a voice.
You mentioned that I think there were 9 research groups and that each cohort is 8 to 10. Is it standard that every group will take around 1 student per year, or are some groups accepting students this year and others not?
The latter. And again, that kind of is based on funding and on kind of cycles of, a particular research group might have funding for one person, and so one person is in that slot for 2 years, and then when that person graduates, that slot kind of comes up. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And there are other groups that might have more funding 1 year and less funding another year, and so slots open up at different places in different groups each year.
It also depends on the projects that the group is working on, as to what their needs are in terms of, they may be at sort of a low ebb of a project and simply don't need a research assistant then. But in the next cycle, they might need 3. And some groups are much more consistent and they'll take 1 student every year, but it's variable.
Can you speak to which groups are not taking new students over the next?
At the moment, no,
Okay.
because we don't know their status until probably February or March.
For those who've been out of school for maybe over 10 years, how can we best address that in our application? We have an undergrad recommendation, and how much to balance regarding real life experience maybe with that?
Well, a couple things. One is that, and this is just something that I advise all students applying to graduate school, both our program and other programs, in terms of your approach to your statement, right, is to, give us a sense of what your trajectory has been, what has taken you to the point at which you feel in that trajectory you want to, spend 2 years exploring something in a graduate program, and then what you see as potentially the next step in your trajectory. So, it helps us when we're looking at the applications to have a sense of where you've been, where we fit, and why you think our program is the right fit for you at this point, or at least a strong option for you, and what you imagine yourself doing with this experience of graduate school. And so, for those people who've been out of school for a period of time, that period is there's something that in that 10 years you've come to a point where you want to do this. And I was in the same situation when I applied to graduate school. I'd been out for about 12 years, and I tried to convey, what it was that was, driving me to do the work that I had done in the past 12 years, but what was it about that brought me to this point, right? And, in general, I feel like, those students who have been out of a formal educational environment for a while, invariably are bringing something really valuable to the table. And so we kind of want to hear about that. And then what was the second part of your question?
You need like recommendations
Oh,
from
recommendations.
your undergraduate, say, if you were that far out.
Yeah, I mean,
I can, if you want to take
yeah,
that one.
well, one thing that I'll say, just being on the committee, is that for people who've been out for a while, I've seen kind of a variety of, in some cases there are people will ask someone who they've been working with outside of academia, to write a letter because that person is the best person to sort of evaluate what you've been doing recently. There's always a danger if, that you go to someone who was your professor as an undergrad and because it's been a long stretch of time, they're not able to really dig in even to their own memories of you in the classroom or whatever. So it's sort of a combination, but
If you look at our requirement that says 2 of your letters must be academic, please don't interpret that as meaning I must go back to my history professor from my junior year in undergraduate that I have not seen, spoken to, or corresponded with in 10 years, because they won't remember you. And even if they said yes, their letter will not have any meaning, because they won't be able to produce anything that will tell us whether you can succeed in this program. So ask recommenders who know you well and who can speak to your ability to succeed at MIT. And they may be academics, but not someone who you've taken a class with, and that's okay. And if I can seize this moment to answer the question that you haven't asked yet, but I know it's percolating under there, which is, I've been out of school for 10 years, and my GREs are going to be terrible because I've been out of school for 10 years. What's your minimum GRE score? And the answer is we don't have one. And we also view every application in its own merits. So if you've been out of school for 10 years and your GREs look a little bit low, of course, because you've been out of school for 10 years, we're not going to eliminate someone just because their math score is a little bit less than someone who just came out of a bachelor's degree in math. So yes, submit your GRE scores, do your best, but don't panic and don't think that we're going to cross you off just because of those scores.
I mean, I think just having been on the admissions committee a couple of times, on the one hand, experience post undergraduate is really usually looks quite good. So there is definitely strong interest in the stuff that you've been doing outside school, and that is a strength if you've done the interesting work. On the other hand, I think there is sort of a look to say, is the person ready to do graduate school work? In other words, it doesn't mean that you should have come directly from undergraduate, the opposite. But it's important that you can demonstrate that you're ready to be a graduate student for 2 years. If you think you want to come and just continue producing media like you're doing right now, that's not what we're looking for. So do find ways of demonstrating your capabilities as a student as well as a practitioner.
Well said.
I have also kind of a related question on the writing sample. So I've been out of school for like 5 years, and I haven't written. I've done research, but not done like a formal written thing that I wrote myself, that I completely did myself since undergrad. Mm-hmm. And so should I write something new, or should I submit something that I did like 5 years ago?
Well, I was out of school 20 years, so I usually win. How long? And that was a question I asked everyone I talked to, and I just wrote. I couldn't find anything. I wrote something. I wrote something, but connected to the work I've already been doing, just to have a writing sample. It was kind of fun. It was very stressful. So if you've, I don't know. I don't want to speak for the admissions committee, but what I was told is just like, if you have anything that can demonstrate you can write, And then I remember asking the alumni panel when I was here, and they were also closer to graduating. I think within 5 years of school, because you had something written, that seems like not that long ago to me. I'm not going to speak for it.
I mean, I think the main thing with the writing sample, you know, for the admissions committee, the admissions committee wants to see that you, you know, write well, but also it's equally important to show some amount of, you know, critical and analytical thinking, or, you know, critical analysis. So I know that comes up sometimes in the, you know, in the admissions committee, you know, it's kind of a combination of those two things. What the writing sample actually is meant to convey to the admissions committee. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually really good. I'm glad I'm in good company because I'm in the out of school for over a decade club as well. And I was wondering, I saw that they mentioned on the app that like if you had taken classes that were like I guess related to what you wanted to pursue, even if they don't show up on your transcript, you could list them. What I had done in the past years to make sure that I was wanting to really get into what I wanted to get into was to audit classes. Mm-hmm. And would that count as something that I put down?
Yeah, just make sure it specified that it was an audited class, that you didn't receive a grade. But yeah.
And you know, that's another thing that you might want to work into your statement, right? That you know, that you were so interested in particular you know, aspects of media, or you know, whatever the topic was of those classes, that you know, that you wanted to audit these classes, and what was it, you know, in those classes that you feel like really, you know, that you really got kind of connected to or excited by, that is now kind of informing what you want to do in this program.
Sorry, I do want to ask, I know there's no PhD program at CMS. Is it still sort of useful or designed for students who do want to go do a PhD, or is it more who want to go into sort of creative aspects and that?
Certainly we've had students go right on to PhD programs from our program, so I'm assuming that put them in good stead with some PhD programs.
Yeah.
It probably has a lot to do with what you end up doing in your thesis, and yeah, I don't think it's, you know, insofar as we try to not set you back financially when you come here. I think that it's not like you will not have been wasting your time or your money here before going into a PhD program. So.
And again, from the standpoint of the admissions committee, if you are someone who is interested in pursuing a PhD, ultimately, I think the admission committee tends to want to hear then why this program now.
Yeah.
Right? So why is this student not going straight into a PhD program? Is there something that's specific about this program, you know, which is not a PhD program, that has, you know, a bit more, I would say, potential for this kind of engagement with both, you know, critical analysis and production? You know, if there's something about that you want to do before going forward to a PhD, right? So, yeah, so again, it's sort of one of the questions for everyone entering the program, you know, to try to think about and address in your application is why this program.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I've seen people rejected who look really good and are also applying to lots of PhD programs, and the assumption is they probably really want a PhD, and so so I think, so just to amplify, knowing why you want to come to this program is important to the admissions committee.
So there's been a question back here and one here, so why don't we start with you and then go ahead.
So given that this is an interdisciplinary program, it doesn't necessarily make sense to categorize people disciplines, but generally, people tend to come in from a STEM background or a humanities background, like how many people?
Yes.
they come in from all kinds of backgrounds. It's really difficult to categorize.
If you look at my cohort as an example,
Yeah.
it'd be like one person did a history undergraduate from Dartmouth, another person went to Harvard and did, I don't even know what she did, like sort of
Museum studies?
Yeah, museum studies. One person came from game design and sociology. One person's a filmmaker. One person came from international media work, like working in different UN-related sites doing communications. One person came from a tech maker background, that was me. Yeah, it's all over. One person is a documentary, a filmmaker, but also anthropology background. So that's my cohort. It was, yeah, it's very. I don't feel like from me knowing the cohort behind me and ahead of me that anybody came so much from a STEM background.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two people with some computer science, or people who have self-taught skills around technology, but nobody's not that in the immediate years that I'm familiar with.
In terms of purely STEM.
Yeah.
Purely STEM,
Yeah, that's a pure STEM background is sort of a once in a while kind of thing. But we will get people who are very technology centric who come, as well as people who are very humanistic centric.
Yeah, I'm wondering how, much the department is kind of layered with technology, is it common for research labs or students and thesis work to collaborate with departments? And then also, another question, can you take classes from other MIT departments?
So the second question, yes, you can take courses from other departments and schools at MIT. So we're, Comparative Media Studies is under the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. The Media Lab, which we're kind of physically attached to, our building is attached to there, is part of the School of Architecture and Urban Design, Urban Studies?
Architecture and planning.
Architecture and planning. And there's the engineering school. There's a PhD program in, what is it? It's got that very long humanities.
History, anthropology, science, technology, and society.
Yeah.
Has.
And that sort of emerged from the science and technology studies unit, but kind of connects people who are interested in history, anthropology, etc. So there are other graduate programs at MIT that you can draw on in your electives for sure. And the first part of your question?
It was about collaboration.
It was about collaboration.
Which, I mean, I'd say it's sort of catch as catch can, but frequently I've seen where graduate students end up meeting graduate students in other programs and finding some intersection, particularly because lots of the more traditional sciences, frequently their funding includes a requirement for some kind of public communication. And so there actually are opportunities to do projects in which I've designed games for what were largely engineering projects. So it's those kinds of I wouldn't say that you could come expecting them, but they can happen. So.
I mean, within the student experience, and maybe you can speak to this a bit more, because the curriculum in the first year is fairly defined, it does take some effort, I think, to meet graduate students who are outside of our program. Among faculty, there's collaboration that happens as well, among graduate students, it takes, like you're saying, it's possible, but it takes a little bit of effort.
I think the first semester you're locked in with your cohort because you're taking all the classes together. But because there's the consortium, in most of your classes you will have students most of my classes have at least one or two students from Harvard. So just one other person in the mix, or from another department even. Like, we also I feel like we're in line or close to ACT as well, which is art, culture, technology, and there's some overlap there. We're physically in the same space, but sometimes you meet students from there. You might take a gym class the first semester and meet people. Also depends where you live. Like if you live in graduate housing, sometimes you have opportunity to meet people. So I think it really just depends on, especially in the first year or first semester, is how much you want to, put yourself. There's a lot of opportunities to do things.
And the relationship with arts, culture, and technology is one that I think is being actively fostered, in the sense that this year, for the first time, as kind of a sub-series within the colloquium series, we have a series of speakers who are being kind of brought into the colloquium as part of a collaboration between one of our faculty members and one of the faculty members in arts, culture, and technology. So that's a series specifically on, I think it's called the Civic Arts series. So those are speakers who are engaged in some form of media production that is also, coming from an arts perspective or background, but which is sort of using an artistic approach to media technologies in the goal of kind of civic engagement, if that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a really fruitful kind of collaboration, both in terms of the speakers who've been coming in and in terms of the possibilities for, I think, for our graduate students to meet graduate students in ACT. And it's in one of the ACT spaces, which is also a really great kind of change. So
yeah, I think it's been great. Yeah.
And I'll just chop on to that, the ability to be interdisciplinary and to work with other students from all of the institute is always up to the individual. But that said, MIT in general has an enormously interdisciplinary attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Every department, every program at MIT, you will find people who have joint appointments between two different departments, two different schools sometimes. The MIT Data Center, which is the building that looks like it dropped in out of a Dr. Seuss book, was constructed specifically to force different groups to encounter each other on the first floor because of those happy coincidences and possible collaborations. So the atmosphere here at the Institute is a very collaborative one.
other questions? Yeah.
Are there any summer courses and any project in the summer for the second year?
Between the first and second years? Well, so students tend to use that summer in a variety of different ways. There are some courses, right, but they're not specifically CMS courses.
So there's the short answer to that is no.
Okay.
MIT offers a few courses over the summer, but they probably won't be anything that our students would be interested in. And the Harvard summer courses are not covered by the consortium agreement. So most of our students will either do research in one of their research groups over the summer, or they will travel and do their thesis research over the summer.
Also, there are other programs at MIT, like MISTY, which is like a study abroad thing, where depending on, that's something you could look into. You can also get certain types of funding to do other research, or like we get, there's a travel grant every year to go to a conference. It can be related to the larger field of your research. So some people do thesis work over the summer, and some people don't. Some people work.
Yeah.
Two percentage questions. What percentage of the students do non-traditional kind of project-based with a written component? And what percentage of the students have children?
Sorry, the question was, what percentage have children?
Yeah.
That's one of the smaller percentages.
Certainly not one every year.
Yeah, it's fairly infrequent. I think Abe Stein was the last student we had who had
He
kids.
didn't even have his kids. I think they were after he got out. Yeah.
No, he had one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's rare.
It's not that we specifically discourage people with children from applying. It's that it's often very daunting to think of parenting and graduate school at the same time. But that said, we have had people successfully do it and graduate, and their children even survived.
Also, there's so many grad students here, so the people that are in longer grad programs, many of them have kids.
Yeah.
And so in the community at large, there are people, there are parents, and all the like community health and wellness services are focused on the community at MIT, and that usually doesn't differentiate between students, staff, faculty. So in terms of like, being a parent here is not an anomaly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At
And
all.
there is family housing. The dorms are not just for singles. So if somebody does come with kids, it is doable.
Yeah.
And there are babysitting networks within that housing.
Your other question about percentages that are sort of mixed, Vita, correct me if it's changed, but students doing some additional media production as part of their thesis, that's always secondary. I mean, it has to be, in the past it's always had to be a written thesis primarily, and if media production somehow informed that, like I made this thing and that's part of my research, that's happened, but I wouldn't come thinking I'll do a thesis that's half documentary and half written thesis, because that's not the way it's been done in the past.
I mean, it's been slowly changing, I think, but so that I feel like it's more frequent, but yeah, it's not a substitute for the writing. I know that in one of the cases, one of the recent cases that I was a co-advisor on, Beza Boya-Kyolu, she did a written project, a written thesis, and was working on a documentary film that was connected to the same thing, and so she, cut, I think, maybe a 10-minute piece that was, that then she went on to use to, once she graduated, to apply for funding for the longer documentary. And she also had an element of her thesis that made use of one of our colleagues, Sasha Costanza-Schock, a platform that they developed for using the phone for, how would you describe it? Well, in this case, she used a phone line, like an 800 number in Turkey, where her project was based, for people to call in and share their memories of this particular popular media figure, a singer who was the most popular singer in Turkey, who was also, who also cross-dressed in sort of the era and style of Liberace, but within a very different cultural context. And so, so Beza used this platform that Sasha had created to open an 800 number in Turkey for people to call in and share their memories of this figure. And that ended up kind of really blowing up, and she had hundreds of phone calls, and she was able to then take material from that came in over the phone line and weave it into her written thesis, so that became not just an additional component, but it was actually part of the research process, right? But all of that said, William Uricchio and I, who were the co-advisors on that particular project, did make some allowance for the fact that that Beza had produced these other two media components, in the sense that at the level of, I think, word count for her written piece, it was probably a little bit shorter. I don't know whether it ended up, I don't know, you might know. Or at least like we allowed her to,
yeah.
But it wasn't a lot shorter, because she ended up, once she dug into it, she ended up, writing you know, close to the same length as everyone else. But there was some allowance that we made, understanding that these media components were part of the larger project.
What proportion of students, first of all, how many people in the group, and then what percentage of people were
From undergrad.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, so the first part of the question,
How many people?
how many people
In a
per
cohort?
in a cohort?
8 to 10.
8 to 10. And then the second question is the percentage of students who are coming straight out of undergrad into it. Each year,
One or two?
it might be just one or
I'd
two
say a
people.
quarter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1 or 2 people. But it varies from year to year. And, you know, because some years we have more applicants who are directly out of undergrad, and some years not. And, you know, again, the deciding, I mean, there's no kind of like fixed number that we're looking for. It's for someone who's coming straight out of undergrad, like everyone else, we want to get a sense in their statement, you know, why graduate study, why this program, why now, right? And it may be that in the past, some of the undergrads who have come relatively straight into our program, you know, had engaged in some sort of work as an undergrad that just got them really passionate about a particular aspect of media, that they wanted to just continue with, you know, immediately out of undergrad to like build upon whatever. So again, it sort of comes down to, you know, what you can convey to us about, you know, about that trajectory, right, of going from undergrad into grad school.
If I can interrupt
Yeah.
briefly with a question from the
Sure.
interwebs that I think you guys will be interested in. Somebody asked if it was possible and if it was okay to apply to 2 programs at the same time, if they were equally interested in CMS and, say, ACT or the Media Lab. And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. It's fine to apply to more than one program at once. In fact, it's very common.
So my question is about the writing sample, especially from someone who's straight out of undergrad. I wonder what's like, based on like how the committee reads the applications and reads the writing samples, like what might be a strategic way to, because my concern is about the writing sample is it being too like discipline specific, that might be just kind of like dry or like not tailored for the, well, yeah, just a little too discipline specific coming straight out of undergrad. So what might be some recommendations for that situation?
I mean, I think that and you know, you might have other ideas as well, but I would say that, you know, if there is a longer paper, for example, that you've written for one of your undergrad courses, that A is something that you're really, that at the time at least, and you know, ideally still is something that you're really passionate about, and where you feel like you really dug into something and your work really shined, you know, shone. And, you know, ideally something where we get a sense of your, you know, depending on, you know, even if it is specific to a particular discipline, to get a sense of your critical and analytical skills. And if it's critical and analytical skills in relation to some kind of a text, like a media text or written text or whatever, then, I mean, although we have people whose experience is, you know, runs the gamut, you know, there are people whose main kind of scholarly engagement, like, is, you know, is centered on, you know, the analysis of media texts, or, you know, it may be that there's, if you majored in history, that there's a particular paper where you are able to demonstrate that particular, you know, methodology of archival research, And, you know, just
Yeah.
so that we have a sense of whatever discipline you went through, kind of, you know, where you get to show us your critical and analytical skills within that discipline.
Yeah, I think I remember reading them just trying to evaluate the person as a writer and a thinker and a researcher. I wasn't evaluating them as a media scholar. So that there are other opportunities, like in your personal statement, to talk about your future interests. The writing sample is really there to show us that you sort of are up to the task in terms of reading and writing and thinking.
What was the biggest surprise, like both good and bad, about the program?
Oh, man. Well, I don't know. That's hard. It was for me personally, it was a very big shift. Just because I'm several years out of school and I ended a big project that I was doing in New York, and I've never not lived in New York. So for me, you know, that's a tough question. I don't know how to say it. It was hard to imagine what it was going to be, and now it's hard to imagine not knowing what it is. So I think I was nervous about the rigor and how scary it would be, about, you know, the work, especially having been out of school, and you know, there was an adjustment around it, but I genuinely, I like what I'm doing here, and so it's a good fit. Like if you're not interested in media, and, you know, especially, it's tempting because this is a funded program, it's not for you. Don't come in, because you gotta like it. Like, you gotta nerd out on it. And there's some nerding out here. So yeah, I mean, I think what I think is great here is, like, there's a casualness and access. Like, maybe that's just grad school at large, but like, I've sent in. You can send an email to anybody and they'll generally write you back. Like, for instance, my friend came here to screen a movie which MIT India helped organize, and they also work in education, and I asked Justin, could they come and see the lab, and they met with the lab person there, and they ended up having a lot of synergy, and it was just really easy to do that. Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, you know, I'm very chauvinistic around New York, you know, so the challenges in living here are the challenges of it not being New York City. Yeah, that's what I would say. It's my diplomatic answer.
You can speak offline as well.
Yes, we can. And I know Italian, and I encourage you to apply. Everyone should apply. If it's right for you, I should say.
Has anyone started the application? Got any questions specifically about the application?
I just asked them.
Okay. There's a couple of questions that I always get after the fact, so I figure I'll answer them now since you're here. But go ahead.
Actually, you just reminded me. Now that I have heard that you could also apply to, what was it, the ACT program. Like, can you use the same letter writers you have? It's like I'm so far out of school. I'm not even
Yes,
sure
but they'll have to submit their letters twice. It's the platform of the application is the same, but it doesn't share any of the data between the applications. So your letter writers would have to essentially write. They can use the text of the same letter, but they'd have to write it and submit it twice.
I thought it was really interesting that they kind of give you a body text that you copy and then you send. So it's basically different.
They do that on purpose, because in other platforms you would click a link and the system would send an email to your letter writer, and they found that they were going into people's spam boxes, and that if the email comes from you with the copy and the paste and the text, that it doesn't get sucked into a spam box and your letter writer actually gets the email. So there's a method.
Oh.
I would also encourage, just because I've seen this in incoming applications, is to ask your letter writer, if you are applying to different kinds of programs or different programs here, to make sure that your letter writers are specific in each letter about what they're recommending, what program they're recommending you to. Even if the body of the letter is pretty much the same, just so that every now and then we'll get a letter where
They say they'd make a good PhD candidate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
or they're referring to SUNY.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even though the strength of the letter, if it's a
Every
strong letter, it's a
admissions
strong
committee
letter.
gets
But
that.
those are the kind of things that just kind of the little details that stand out every now and then. But,
So there's a couple things that I figured I'd just remind people of. The application deadline is January 1st. Take your GREs before December 15th. If you take them after December 15th, we will not get the scores in time and your application will not be reviewed. Period. So just, if you haven't taken the test yet, make sure you take it before December 15th. Yes.
So I send the GRE score to MIT, the general fourth year code.
If you send it to any department at MIT, we will be able to access the scores. Good question. If you are an international student, you will have to take the IELTS, which is the International English Language Testing Service. The minimum score is 7, and you don't necessarily have to have the scores sent. You can provide what they call the testing report form, the TRF number in the application. Do not wait until midnight on December 31st to submit your application. If you submit it a day before then, it gives me a chance to eyeball it and see if there's anything missing and let you know that maybe all 3 letters are missing, maybe 1 is missing, maybe your GRE scores aren't in yet. That being said, there's no particular advantage to submitting it a month early because rolling admissions is not a thing here. We don't look at any of the applications until after the deadline. You will be asked to submit a financial statement in the application that is not viewed by the admissions committee until after decisions are made. So it doesn't influence their decision at all. But we're also, we fund our students, so it's not going to influence them anyway. Anybody want to ask her? Yes?
Any comments about portfolios that we submit? Suggestions about that? Any preferred formats?
PDF is the preferred format.
Over website?
Yeah, you can provide links, but just be careful that you test your links before you submit them, because sometimes the links break. That's why we often prefer PDF. And remember, the portfolio is optional.
Although I will say that when someone's done a genuinely interesting website, it's worthwhile. So you might want to back it up with PDFs, but if you've got something kind of interesting going on a website, by all means.
I created a portfolio website to
Yeah.
submit, and I did it in Squarespace and made it really. I've been trying to redo my website for 15 years, and then I just did a quick portfolio site to highlight the things that I thought were relevant. Because that was what you told me. You said if you have that kind of stuff, just sort of links there. And there's some place in the application, right, where you could just say any other information.
Yep. We
Where
try
I put,
to make it as flexible as possible for you guys.
just I wrote that I'm a licensed insurance broker.
I also think, just my experience of the admissions committee is that the committee are themselves diverse. And so the reality is some people who really have interesting creative work will appeal to some people. Other people are almost narrowly focused on sort of the more academic side. That's just their different personalities of the different readers. And you all have to sort of fight it out in the end. So I would say certainly if you've got any strengths, play to them. Obviously, there's no way of guaranteeing who's going to be on the committee and what's going to appeal to them, but you should certainly play to your strengths. So, yeah.
Best foot forward.
I always look at the portfolios.
Yeah.
I think the last thing would be that if you write to CMSW admissions at MIT EDU, your email will come to me. So in case you want to face, to go along with the question that you're asking for help on, it's my job to answer these questions, and it's my job to help you get through the application process successfully. So please don't feel shy at all. If you hit a snag, if you don't understand something, if you think something's not quite right, let me know.
And Shannon's been doing this a long time and is the front line of the application process and is just about the most approachable person I know. So I think, you take advantage of like, if you have questions that come up after today, just, shoot Shannon an email.
And the response rate is lightning.
I try. And everybody knows that you are all cordially invited to the colloquium this evening, which is our alumni panel. And so you'll have a chance to see what some of our alums are doing out there in the world once they've gotten their degree.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Good luck, everybody. Oh, excellent. Good, good.
They overcharged and they refunded.
I'll figure it out. No worries.
I have a question about.
Hi. Are you Taylor's father?
I'm sorry?
Did you talk to Cambridge Mountain?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry.